All right, this is an original piece I wrote, and it's like a mixture blending Arabic makam and a little bit of flamenco bulerías on the end part. It's based on Arabic makam, which uses several flavors, or what we call in Arabic ajnas. Okay, in this case is what we call rast, bayati, saba, Hijaz, and I think I'm not leaving anything else out. Yeah. All right. So the approach that I use on the guitar, it's very personal. It's very difficult with a Western instrument to get 100% to have all the microtones available that you will need. And in makam music, in Arabic music, when you talk in general to people or even reading some books, etc., everybody seems to meet in the quarter tone neighborhood, okay, in the 3/4 right there to start placing the microtones. Now, even though there are different theories on the division of the pitches and where you'll find certain pitches on certain flavors, is in real life there is not such an agreement, okay, because it varies a lot from country to country, from region to region, even from town to town. Different masters, they learn the same ajnas or the same flavors, in makam, using slightly different microtones. Like I said, if we needed to have like a central point to start, will be the close to the quarter tone, but then it will vary. And also another thing that many theorists don't regard so much is what we call in Oriental music the melodic attraction. It's something very organic that changes the microtone right away according to the melody, the direction of the melody, and even sometimes just to the fingers of the player and the nature of their instrument, because in some cases, in some instruments, you find that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do the same exact microtone all the time, okay? I'm talking about a difference between cents, like 10 cents, sometimes 15, depending, all right? Sometimes a little bit less, okay? But those ghost microtones that I like to call are really the ones that give the character and the flavor to a certain sound that comes from from certain region, okay, in the Arab countries, and that will happen also too in places like Turkey with the Turkish makam, etc. All right, I will even dare to say it all the way to Persia and even part of India. All right, so like I said before, even if there are certain theories. Theories are great, but they are made many times by musicologists, ethnomusicologists, etc. And in the world of just players, especially in those cultures, they kind of function in a different way. Not demeaning anybody. It's actually, I think, it's very important. The labor that those musicologists or ethnomusicologists or just or researchers, their labor is super important, but it's also the one of the masters that learn by oral tradition, and sometimes you actually ask them certain things like, how many cents is this note or the other one, and they will not even be able to tell you, but that's all right, it's like both sides, they make like a whole thing complete, And many times I wish, we will work more together, musicologists or etc., and just players, and true native artists. But anyway, so the approach that I'm using on this guitar is just using some fretlets, added frets. They are, like as mentioned, in the neighborhood of the 3/4, and some of them are slightly off, and sometimes I even used a little extra pressure on the fret. I have high frets on this guitar, so adding a little extra pressure, even sometimes a little bending, I can shift a little bit those 10 cents, sometimes less difference, between certain notes, In the case of this piece, even though it could be played on a standard tuning on the guitar, E, A, D, G, B, E, I'm using actually a C on the 6th string and a G on the 5th string, okay? That is just to help me, keep certain ringing drone or sound, Like if I'm in Rust on C, and then G on the 5th, helps me when I move to Hijaz here. A little detail here is like the Hijaz, specifically the Hijaz that I'm playing on this piece is not 100% pure Hijaz, is what we refer to as a piano Hijaz. Okay, we call it piano Hijaz because I'm using some tempered notes, and there is an interval between the second and the third note that should be slightly shorter, and I'm not doing it this time. In other pieces on Hijaz I do it. In this case I'm not using it. So it all depends, where you do these kind of things, that it will be accepted or not culturally. I mean, I've spent many years in the Middle East playing piano Hijaz and never had any complaints playing along with other, more pure traditional players and native players. But it is true that if we want to stay true to the makam tradition, that interval should be a little bit shorter, so you know. This piece is based on traditional Japanese music, and especially on the koto tradition. It's called Love Beyond Lives, and it was featured in the soundtrack of a trilogy called, in Spanish, it was a Spanish trilogy called Las cenizas de nuestros padres, something like Our Father's Ashes. Okay. As I mentioned, it's based on the koto tradition. Basically, the approach that I'm using here is different this time. I'm only using bendings. You see, we have different ways of getting some microtones on the guitar. We have added frets, we can bend the strings, we can use a slide, you will see later. We can use alternative tunings where we have a string tuned to a microtonal series of notes, or several strings tuned like that you can call anytime you need a microtone. Okay, but each one of them has its own pros and cons, you know. So for instance, in this case, I'm using the bending techniques, bending the strings, which means, you know, I bend the string in order to reach the pitch of the microtone. In this case, the microtones that I'm using are slightly higher than the tempered notes, around roughly 15, between 10 and 15 cents, you know. I'm not perfect on tuning, and since it's bending, you know, it's a different thing. Basically, this technique works for this specific piece because I'm not using a lot of fast notes, you know, one after the other, and I don't need to flow fast between, you know, like playing on a scale or something like that, you know. In reality, we're having on this piece, we're having two C's. This one, the natural, the tempered C, and then we have the C sharp that is a little bit higher. Okay, and I'm also using tempered D, but I'm also using a little higher D. Like when I do, if I do this, and in this case I finish with the tempered C. Okay. Or if I get to this phrase, I have that C sharp raised, okay, by a few cents. Here is the same C sharp again. And I come back to the tempered natural C. Okay, so it works for certain things. In this piece, it doesn't use a lot of microtones. When we talk about traditional music that uses microtones, it's quite different than when we talk about European contemporary music that, you know, is based on microtones, on different systems or temperaments, etc. Okay, it's very difficult to divide the octave and say this is the way. You know, that's kind of like a very friend of mine, physicist, explained me. You know, that was like a Newton way of thinking. You know, we're trying to find a formula and apply it every time, make sure that always gives the results that we expect by the formula. You know, but in the case of a lot of these traditions, it doesn't work like that. It's kind of similar, as he was saying, to quantum physics, you know, where the degree of observation, consciousness about what you're doing, etc., changes the results. You know, I refer to it many times too as melodic attraction. You know, so even I'm pointing at certain microtones right now that are very clear, but in many other pieces there are also other notes which are a little bit adjusted, you know, through the performance in order to give that kind of flavor or sound that is characteristics of these traditions. Okay, but in the case of those pitches that are very difficult to really come up with a theory or a statement saying, you know, it happens every time I get here, or it is divided this way and I have to hit this pitch, you know. It varies a lot, you know, with the music and with the person playing it, and also, as I mentioned, also with the instrument and how the instrument behaves in terms of how much quality the instrument has, that you can actually control the tuning, etc. And when we go to certain Middle Eastern instruments or even Persian ones, they have very thin wire strings, which even if you only hit the string a little bit harder than the usual, it already goes out of tune, that we will say, meaning it will sound a certain sense off, and many times we do that on purpose to get those microtones, okay? This piece is originally set Persian tasnif, okay, which is basically song, but in my case, I just turned this tasnif into an instrumental piece. It kind of sounds more like a reng than a tasnif. All right, it's based on radif, that's cat music from Iran, Persia, Basically, the approach that I'm using is that of the fretlets again, when we find the microtonal notes in radif, in dasgat, we have the korom and other microtones. These are on a range between minus 35 cents all the way to minus 42, even sometimes 45 cents, okay? Again, they seem to be very close to a quarter tone, but they're not. In the case of this piece, I'm just using my 6th string on D, just to get the drum going on. I could be playing the same piece exactly on the standard tuning, no problem at all, okay? And I'm being, helped by the fretlets, these added frets that I have here, that are roughly a little bit off from halfway, from close to a quarter tone, but they're not, just slightly off. And then, like I mentioned previously too, because my frets are a little high, by the pressing of the strings, I just get a little, some extra cents there for the pitches. Okay, but basically that gives me the arrangement of a dasgat called neva. And I have it here on the, or I can move it out. Basically, that is the approach I'm using for this piece. And this setup that I'm using right here, and you're gonna see it in several pieces that I do, is something I don't move from my guitar, and it allows me to play certain makam music, not all of it. Also Persian, radif or dasgat, okay? I can do it on the standard tuning, so I don't have to be switching, although I switch to other tunings to get more resonance sometimes from the instrument. But still, if I want to just blend it with other styles, I can stay on the standard tuning. And what I'm doing is I'm finding I'm conciliating, I don't know if I can use that word. I'm trying to find a balance, between the zone where many microtones are found in different traditions, like Arabic makam, sometimes Turkish, the Persian radif, etc. Okay, because many of them, they have like a zone, a range, okay, where they place the microtones and they move along. Some of them, they are very strict, others are not so much. And like I mentioned in other pieces, according to different regions and different master musicians, they will vary. So by putting all these different spots where the pitches will be, I just came up with a zone where I would say, okay, I can be between minus 32 cents to minus 42 cents or something like that. And around that area, I can be at home and not be destroying, the feel of the actual music and the tradition. You always have very purist people who will come and say, no, that should be exactly here, and no arguments. But in my case, obviously, I'm a guitar player. I'm not playing a fully microtonal instrument. I wish there would be one that accurate and that practical, especially because sometimes that's the problem. We create different guitars with different fretboards with different temperaments and systems, but the idea, in my personal case, is to get to a halfway there where I can actually have not all of it, but a lot of it, and especially what I need to play all these pieces, without going crazy with a lot of guitars or a lot of things like that. Okay, but this is just my personal way. Okay, so that's about it for this dasgat. All right, and this is Persian music on dasgat neva. This piece comes from the Indian music tradition known as raga music. This is a raga called Herbi. Okay, it's actually what we'll refer to as Mishra Herbi, because Mishra includes a mixture of a few extra notes that we would not use on the actual raga Herbi. Basically, when we find microtones in Indian music, they are very, very subtle. There are different theories of dividing the shrutis, to place in the pitches. And it happens one more time, like I mentioned in many of the other pieces, it happens that according to different gharana, as they call in India, or different lineage of masters, as you learn in the oral tradition, you tend to place those pitches, those microtones in different places, okay? There are certain ragas where microtones are very, very obvious, already to somebody who is used to microtones, of course. But there are others that are very subtle. And besides that, there is also the performance, the way you perform in your instrument, either if it's the voice or something like a vina or a sarangi, a sarod, etc., and how you connect the notes. So we not only have certain microtones on what we could call scale degrees, just for you and me to understand, okay? But we will have also certain microtones that we pass through as we connect notes, or as I like to say, as we make certain notes crying, and those are super important too. And they're not so well defined by the different theories about the shrutis and where all these pitches are supposed to go, okay? That's something extra that the performer brings along, and it will be quite difficult, or if not impossible, to classify it or make a theory of it, although I'll be open to read or have a nice talk with anybody interested in that, because it's also an interesting, project. Let's put it that way. Okay, so basically, the approach that I'm using on the guitar right now is just a slide. I'm actually doing something quite new here for myself, because I usually play this type of music on an acoustic steel strings guitar, and I'm using now like a Spanish nylon string guitar, so it's a different tone, but as long as you don't push it works quite nice, okay? I'm using a slide, a bottleneck slide, as some people call it, okay? Which is just a tube you put in your finger. It comes from the actual bottleneck that you will put in your finger. Now it's just a steel, tube made out of steel, yeah? And we have different notes here, that we adjust. For instance, we have ga, komal ga, which is like a minor third, okay? And there is a tiny bit lower. It's not, but it's more. Just a few cents lower, okay? In Indian ragas, we don't find such clear microtones as we find in makam music or Persian dasgat, etc., They are more subtle. We have also the komal re, which is very, very close to the actually tempered notes, but sometimes it can be a tiny bit lower, okay? And then we have all those microtones that are not exactly part of the shrutis or the actual notes that are fixed on the mode or scale for you to understand that we're using, But it's more part of the performance. For instance, when I do this, okay, this note in reality, which is a common knee or the flat 7, it will be up here, okay? But as I come from here, I take it a few microtones lower, okay? These are certain things that when you actually study the tradition in the oral way, that is the most common in these styles of music, you learn all that by ear and by repetition, and many times you don't even realize what you're doing, In my personal case, it was not until I got into more like, oh, why is this and this microtone and how many cents and things like that. For many years, I was studying styles of music which contains microtones, but I was not really into the mathematics of it, or knowing and measuring how many cents was every microtone, especially because in those traditions you don't study those things so much, okay? But it was more developing the ear and the playing. But as I grew older and I was more relaxed about it and have more time to dedicate to it, I start paying more attention, in a more technical way, or if I can say it like that, okay? So we have things like same thing here. This komal da is like a flat 6, okay? That also tends to be a little bit lowered. In some ragas it can get even lower than what I'm using here, You see here it's not, but okay. I'm also using a different tuning on my guitar for this. Right now on this guitar I'm using D, A, D, A, D, D, okay? Originally I used the same thing but one step lower on the steel string guitar. It sounds really good, and there I can use thicker strings so I get tension for the slide to be able to play the slide without having to raise the strings or things like that. But on the nylon it's difficult, so I had the same tuning but one step higher in order to get more tension on the strings. I'm also playing on sa, which translates to D, like if we were saying the key of D, which is quite common on the Venas and the Mohan Venas and Chaturangis and those type of Indian instruments. So it works like that. And the reason why I did this setup of this way of tuning is because I can get two Sas or two Ds in this case on the first two strings with the fifth here. A little bit of tune now. And get more resonance in order to imitate the functions that different strings made on sitars, sarots, and other Indian instruments, okay? When you do the typical Indian chala and other things like that. So that's just another technical aspect of playing this music on a guitar, all right? The tuning really makes things easier. This piece of music is a composition, a Chinese composition called Chai Tou Fan, and it's based on a story of two lovers outside of Shanghai, and their dramatic love story of separation. It's quite a beautiful story, actually. The music is based on traditional Chinese music, and that which is played on an instrument called the guzheng. Okay, some people will say in the West guqin, things like that. All right, and I apologize already for my Chinese pronunciation, which is quite pitiful. But anyway, this instrument has 7 strings, and it's a piece of wood that is laid flat. Okay, and you actually press with your fingers on the fretboard, which is fretless, and you pluck with the right hand, and you slide with the tip of your fingers, etc. All right, I first started imitating this instrument with a fretless guitar played on my lap, and then I switched to using a slide, a bottleneck slide, they call it, just to slide on the strings. So the approach I'm using here in order to get all those microtones and the way the music is played and it's to sound is by using this slide and also adjusting my tuning. Once again, this time it's very difficult to play this type of music or from this instrument with the standard tuning. So the tuning I'm using is from 6th to 1st, E, G, B, G, B, E. Okay. Again, here in Chinese music is going to happen a lot like in Indian music. The existence or the use of microtones is very subtle in terms of there are certain notes that are fixed, but there are a lot of notes that are microtonal, and they come more with the performance and with the melodic attraction that I mentioned earlier, okay? And there is also that degree of notes, that microtones that we use connecting notes. Some people will not consider them. And many times when we play music or study music with microtones, we consider the fixed microtones that form the scale or the system or the division, but we don't consider so much if we are just sliding one note, connecting everything from one note to the other, like this, But in Oriental or Far East and Middle East traditions, those microtones actually are almost as important than the fixed ones that I call. Especially in Chinese music and especially on this instrument that I mentioned, the guzheng, because I remember when I was studying in Shanghai for this instrument, even the noise made by the finger was part of the music. It's very interesting because it's something we try to get rid of in the West, noises in the performance. We have a phrase that goes like, you see these notes I'm doing right here? You can not even hear them, but they are as important, okay? So again, microtones that we use here, again, is just a few cents lower. Here, we have this, will be like the 6. If we don't treat this as a scale or as a mode. In reality, much of Chinese music, in Japanese also happens, that it will come with certain tunings that you use for your instruments, and also every instrument has like a certain tablature, if I may call it, a certain way, so it will be all written there. So it's even more difficult when you try to explain that to somebody playing another instrument that is not the native, okay? But if I should take G as my 1, this will be my flat 6, which is a little bit lower there. It will be like about 20 cents, something like that, okay? To be honest, I haven't really made all the measurements, because like I said, it just fluctuates so much when you're playing, in order to get the performance, that it's just crazy to come up with a table with all the pitches in a certain system and division, yeah. Even here, I don't even get to the perfect fifth. I get a little bit lower. Here, yeah, I do the third that is very close to the actual tempered third. But you see this fifth is a little bit lower. And this is very interesting because many times fifths and fourths tend to be closer to the tempered, especially, because we part from the idea of the overtones and the harmonic series, yeah. But in these cases, it doesn't happen. And if you were to be too temperate, it will not sound Chinese at all. All right. You see here is a good example of what I was explaining about all the microtones you pass through when you're connecting two notes are almost as important as the fixed ones in the scale, if I might call it like that. All right, this wouldn't be the same, and it would not sound Chinese if I were just to do like something like this. And it's funny because here I'm doing the third again, but in this case it's a lower third, okay, not like the one I did here. Here I stop on what we could call a tempered third, but in this case, I get a little bit lower. So like I said, again, I always refer a lot to anybody who wants to actually learn more about these ancient traditions, especially from the East, which uses microtones. Many times, especially as a performer, trying to understand microtones from the point of view of what is the division of the octave, so I know where they are and things like that. It will not work. It will make the whole experience very frustrating. It will be more difficult to actually get a good feel for the music and make it sound original. That's where oral traditions work so well, yeah, for these musics. So anyway, those are a few details of the approach of this type of traditional Chinese music.